listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the sale of illegal tobacco is skyrocketing, which is also linked to an exploding turf war and crime wave across the country. The New South Wales Premier says one solution is to cut back on the federal excise on legal cigarettes, but some experts are slamming the move, saying we need to shut down the supply chain. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Tuesday, the 3rd of June. The minimum wage is increasing by $32 a week from July. That's a 3.5% boost. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says it will help take the sting out of cost of living pressures, calling it a win for essential workers who keep our economy moving.
Real wages had declined for 5 quarters in a row when we came to office. Now we've had 5 quarters of increasing in real wages, and this decision today will be welcomed.
Unions say it's a much-needed boost for workers doing it tough, but Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry CEO Andrew McKellar says the 3.5% increase will be tough for many struggling businesses.
We've seen profitability for many businesses going backwards over the past 18 months or so. And in addition, we're facing record levels of business insolvencies.
Erin Patterson has continued to give evidence at the mushroom murder trial. The 50-year-old admitting she would often buy different varieties of mushrooms at Woolworths and farmers markets. When asked what she liked about exotic mushrooms, Erin replied, quote, "They just taste more interesting, more flavour." Ms Patterson is charged with 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. She has pleaded not guilty to all charges. And Bluey Lego is finally here. Characters from the much-loved cartoon series have now been made into Lego sets, which are available in stores now. Here is Justine McKenny from Lego Australia.
There's no doubt that Bluey has global appeal, and that's why we're so excited that Bluey is now in stores around the world.
But apparently everyone isn't happy with the new Bluey Lego, with some die-hard fans saying the figures look too human and others commenting they don't have tails. Now it's time to get into our deep dive with Professor Becky Freeman, a public health academic from the University of Sydney, on how we can tackle our illegal tobacco wars, with cheap cigarettes having a massive impact on our health with devastating long-term consequences. Becky, thanks so much for joining us. We know the tobacco wars have been a big issue in our country across all states and territories for a long time. How serious do you think the problem is?
One of the unfortunate things is we actually don't have very good data about how big the illicit market is. So the latest government data we have says about 15% of the market is illicit tobacco. So we're waiting for those 2024 figures. But I think, as everyone knows, if you just walk around your own neighborhood, you can see there, especially in New South Wales, there are way more tobacconists than there ever have been. And the reports we're getting from smokers themselves is just how easy these products are to buy. So it wouldn't surprise me when we get those official figures if it's much higher.
I think there were stats reported in one news organisation saying there are about 60 tobacconists for every McDonald's restaurant.
Yeah, so this is in New South Wales in particular. And New South Wales is one of the last states, alongside Victoria, to adopt a licensing system for tobacco retailers, and that's being phased in from July. So essentially, in New South Wales, you've been able to open a tobacconist with virtually no need to file any paperwork about that, to have to pay a registration fee, nothing. So if you could be a hairdresser, a barber, a restaurant, whoever, and you could sell tobacco products in New South Wales.
So we've seen across all states and territories, authorities coming down, including premiers and government leaders, saying we are going to crack down on this tobacco war and make sure there are no illegal products sold over the counter. Can you explain to me why all of us know a tobacconist in our local area that is continuing to sell illegal products over the counter?
Look, I think it's quite simple. It's that these retailers are exploiting smokers. They know that cigarettes are really expensive and that people are addicted. They are selling a cheap, illegal product because they know they will not suffer any repercussions for doing so. And that enforcement has been quite weak, and that they can literally sell these products in broad daylight to anybody, and not much will happen.
We know of at least 100 firebombing attacks in Victoria over 2 years. They're the latest stats. It's a big issue in Victoria as well as right across the country. Why aren't the authorities enforcing these rules?
Look, I'll be the first to, extend some sympathy to our government partners that enforcement, it's complex. We have national laws, we have state level laws, we have community council level laws. But to me, there's so much at stake here that they really need to coordinate better and to enforce these laws that they supported. Now let's look to South Australia. South Australia is doing, I think, probably the best job in the whole country, and we can look to them to learn. They're moving ahead with actual prosecutions, shutting down shops, on-the-spot closure of shops who are caught selling. They also are coordinating across government departments and making sure everyone's working together. And I think other states need to get on board and adopt this same approach.
So, Becky, why aren't they getting on board then if the example is there right in South Australia and it's effective?
I don't know. I don't work for the government. I wouldn't want to speak for them, but I think this is a really pressing public health issue. 2 out of 3 people who smoke will die as a result of their addiction. This is not some sort of trivial issue that we can just ignore. We've been really successful in bringing smoking rates down in this country. Less than 10% of people smoke on a daily basis. But I'm worried that if this illicit tobacco market is allowed to continue to flourish, that those rates, they could go up, or we might not see them continue to come down like we have done.
Talking about New South Wales, the Premier, Chris Minns, has come out the last couple of days suggesting that a way to fix this illegal tobacco market is basically to decrease the federal excise on the cost of legal cigarettes or tobacco. What are your thoughts on that proposal?
Look, I appreciate the sentiment that he wants to do something about this solution, but to me, you would virtually have to remove all the excise tax to be able to compete with the illicit market. So you would be abandoning one of the cornerstones of what we know works in tobacco control, that we know price, after health effects, price is the number one thing smokers cite as the reason why they quit. We actually need to enforce these laws. I don't want people smoking illicit tobacco or legal tobacco. We need to combat this as a whole approach. And to me, the number one thing we could do is control the supply of products. Why are we allowing shops to open everywhere, all across the country? Let's help enforcement do their job by actually having fewer places selling this deadly and addictive product.
So, Becky, how do they do that by the supply? We know there are allegations this tobacco industry, the illegal tobacco industry, is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The profit margin is huge, but it's also allegedly linked to a lot of serious criminal activity. So if the governments do enforce this, they're not only cutting down on people smoking, they're cutting down on crime.
Yeah, and look, I'm coming from a public health point of view, so that's absolutely my priority. I want people to live healthy, full lives, and we know that tobacco is the number one cause of preventable death in Australia. But if it also helps combat crime, obviously very supportive of that. And we do know that there are clearly criminal elements in the supply chain. It's not just a couple of people, selling cigarettes out of the back of their car in a dark alley. This is organized and being sold through tobacconists primarily in broad daylight.
Becky, to your point about the health concerns about this, one may say, especially with vapes now, with so many young Australians addicted to vaping, but also the fact that if you can walk in some circumstances, to your local tobacconist and you can purchase these illegal cigarettes sometimes for $15, that's cheap and therefore more people are going to smoke, correct?
Yeah, that's my big worry, that cheap cigarettes are a real risk factor in young people in particular taking up, because young people don't have a lot of disposable income. So if you price cigarettes out of their reach, they can't afford to buy them. They can't access them. And we have examples from all over the world to show that in countries where cigarettes are more expensive, smoking rates go down, particularly amongst young people.
And so in regards to right now, do you think the governments need to look at what's working quite effectively in South Australia and saying this is not only a really important message to crack down on criminal behaviour, but also to make sure that a growing number of Australians aren't smoking because it's super accessible and also super cheap?
Absolutely. And, there's no silver bullet here. There's no sort of there's one magic solution to solving this problem. But just because something is complex doesn't mean that we can't do it. We have reduced smoking rates from, in the about a third of the population in the 1990s to less than 10% now. Why would we, forego all of that investment, that 30 years of investment, because some criminals are exploiting the expensive cigarettes? To me, we would crack down harder. We would do more. We would accelerate the decline in smoking.
We appreciate you joining us. Thanks so much, Becky.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
That was Professor Becky Freeman, a public health academic from the University of Sydney. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram @The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.